There was a time when life on Earth almost ended. Not from an asteroid, not from a sudden explosion, but from the planet itself. 252 million years ago, the world was thriving. Oceans were filled with ancient life. Forests stretched across the continents. Evolution had taken millions of years to build a complex, living system that seemed unstoppable. And then the ground split open. Across what is now Siberia, vast eruptions poured out fire for thousands of years. The atmosphere thickened with carbon. Temperatures surged. The oceans warmed, then lost their oxygen. Life underwater began to suffocate. On land, ecosystems collapsed as climate turned unstable and toxic. This was not a quick disaster. It was a slow unraveling. Species disappeared one by one, generation after generation, until nearly 90% of marine life was gone and most life on land followed. Earth did not explode. It nearly emptied. And if conditions had worsened just slightly more, complex life might never have returned. We exist today because something survived the worst biological crisis this planet has ever known. This is the story of when life on Earth came closer than ever to vanishing completely. There was a time when Earth did not belong to us. Not to mammals, not to birds, not even to the dinosaurs. But to a far older world that had already perfected life in forms strange and magnificent beyond modern imagination. 252 million years ago, the continents were locked together in a vast supercontinent called Pangaea, a single enormous body of land stretching across the globe like a sleeping titan beneath the sun. Along its coastal margins, the shallow seas shimmered with reefs alive with color and motion, while inland forests of towering ancient conifers breathed out oxygen into heavy, humid air. Life had taken hundreds of millions of years to compose this delicate symphony. Each reef a note, each forest a chord, each creature a quiet instrument in an orchestra conducted by deep time itself. And then, almost too subtly to notice at first, the music began to falter. Yet the greatest catastrophe in Earth's history did not arrive as a single violent blow from the sky. It came slowly, like a fever building beneath the skin of the planet. Far to the north, in what we now know as Siberia, the crust fractured open again and again, and from those wounds poured unimaginable rivers of lava, not for days or months, but for tens of thousands of years. The eruptions released vast quantities of carbon dioxide and toxic gases, thickening the atmosphere like a blanket pulled tighter and tighter around a struggling body. Temperatures began to climb as oceans absorbed the excess carbon and grew more acidic, molecule by invisible molecule. Warm water held less oxygen, circulation slowed, and the deep seas began to suffocate in silence. Coral reefs collapsed. Ancient marine lineages that had survived previous extinctions finally vanished. Nearly 90% of life in the oceans disappeared, as if the sea itself had forgotten how to breathe. On land, forests withered under extreme heat and unstable climates, food chains unraveled, and ecosystems built over geological ages came apart like fabric torn at every seam. This was the Permian Triassic Extinction, the Great Dying, the closest our planet has ever come to returning to a world ruled only by microbes. For a time, Earth did not burn to ash, nor freeze into lifeless stone, but it hovered at the edge of biological silence. It balanced on a threshold so narrow that had conditions worsened only slightly more, complex life might never have recovered. Every forest we walk through today, every coral reef still clinging to warm seas, every breath we take exists because something endured when almost everything else was erased. To understand how close the Earth came to losing its future, we must return to that ancient world and witness how a thriving planet slowly turned against itself, and how life, fragile yet persistent, faced the greatest trial in its long and uncertain history. Before the sky grew heavy with ash, before the oceans carried the taste of metal, the world was whole in a way that now feels almost sacred. Forests of towering lycopsids rose like living pillars, holding up the green roof of an ancient cathedral. In the warm, shallow seas, coral reefs bloomed like stone gardens lit from within, and trilobites moved across the ocean floor as if they were old memories, still searching for a place to rest. The continents were joined as one vast body, Pangaea, breathing slowly beneath a wide and patient sun. Life did not rush, it unfolded. It layered itself in quiet harmony, each species a note in a long and patient song. But deep beneath that harmony, the earth was changing its rhythm. Far to the north, in a land we now call Siberia, the crust began to fracture. Not with a single violent cry, but with a slow and gathering pressure. Like grief building in the chest of the planet, or from those wounds poured fire. Lava spread across the land in waves, covering forests, swallowing rivers, reshaping the skin of the earth. This was no brief eruption. It was an era of burning. For tens of thousands of years, molten rock flowed and hardened, layer upon layer, until entire ecosystems lay buried beneath black stone. With the fire came breath, but it was a poisoned breath. Carbon dioxide and methane rose into the atmosphere, thickening the sky, wrapping the planet in a fever it could not easily break. But temperatures climbed, seasons blurred. The balance that had taken millions of years to compose began to unravel thread by thread. The oceans absorbed the heat, and as the waters warmed, they lost their ability to cradle oxygen. Life below the surface began to suffocate in silence. Coral reefs faded to pale skeletons. The intricate cities of the sea collapsed inward. Trilobites, survivors of earlier ages, disappeared, leaving behind only their mineral shadows pressed into stone. The food chains that once flowed like braided rivers snapped apart. Nearly 90% of marine species vanished, not in a single catastrophic moment, but in a drawn-out surrender to a world no longer shaped for them. On land, the forests withered. Acid rain fell like tears that burned the leaves before they touched the soil. Drought tightened its grip, splitting the ground into open scars. Animals wandered across landscapes stripped of shelter, their migrations leading nowhere. Extinction did not roar, it hushed. One by one, voices were removed from the chorus of life until only a faint echo remained. The oceans darkened further as oxygen drained away. In the depths, bacteria flourished in the absence of light and breath, releasing toxins into waters already wounded. Entire regions of the planet became biological deserts. It is difficult for us to imagine such a world. A world where complexity collapses and simplicity reigns, where survival belongs not to the mighty, but to the adaptable, the hidden, the small. And yet, even at the edge of total silence, something endured. A few species burrowed underground. Some lingered along the margins of rivers and coasts. Creatures like Lystrosaurus, unassuming, resilient, became unlikely inheritors of a broken world. They did not conquer it. They persisted within it. Yet in their persistence lay the quiet defiance of life itself. This was the Permian Triassic Extinction, the Great Dying, the most severe biological crisis our planet has ever known. It was not merely a chapter of loss. It was a turning point carved into the memory of the Earth. From the emptiness it left behind, new possibilities slowly emerged. Ecosystems rebuilt themselves in simpler forms at first, cautious and sparse. as though life were relearning how to trust the ground beneath it. In time, new lineages would rise. The age of reptiles would expand. The path that would one day lead to dinosaurs, and far beyond them, to mammals, and eventually to us, was opened by this immense and terrible clearing. The world we know was shaped not only by creation, but by near annihilation. When we look back across those millions of years, we are not only studying fossils embedded in stone, we are listening to a warning carried on ancient winds. The Earth is powerful, but it is not unbreakable. Life is persistent, but it is not guaranteed. There was a moment when the flame of complexity burned so low it nearly vanished into darkness. And everything that followed, including our own existence, depends on the fragile fact that it did not. What we have witnessed is not merely an ancient catastrophe, but a chapter written at planetary scale, a reminder that Earth is not a stage built for permanence, but a living system shaped by forces far older and far larger than any single species. The Permian Triassic Extinction was not a single violent day of destruction, but a long unraveling. Fire rising from deep within the planet, gases thickening the atmosphere, our oceans warming and losing their oxygen until the very waters that once cradled life became agents of suffocation. Ecosystems did not collapse all at once. They thinned, weakened, and finally gave way as connections forged over millions of years quietly dissolved. Nearly 90% of marine species disappeared. Forests fell silent. Entire evolutionary lineages, refined across deep time, ended without witness. And yet, life did not vanish. It persisted in the margins, in burrows beneath scorched earth, and in waters where oxygen was scarce but not entirely gone. Survival belonged not to the largest or the strongest, but to the adaptable, the patient, the small. From that fragile persistence, the planet began again. Recovery took millions of years. Complexity returned slowly, cautiously, as though life itself were relearning balance. New ecosystems formed. Reptiles expanded into empty dominions. Dinosaurs would one day rise. Mammals would endure in shadow. And through an unbroken chain of survival stretching across immense spans of time, and that distant resilience would eventually make room for us. We are not separate from that history. We are its consequence. The rocks preserve what memory cannot. Evidence that climate can shift beyond expectation, that atmospheric chemistry can tilt toward crisis, that even the most intricate web of life can unravel under sustained imbalance. The Earth will endure, as it has endured fire and suffocation before. But endurance at the scale of a planet is not the same as continuity at the scale of living systems or civilizations. There was a moment, 252 million years ago, when the flame of biological complexity burned so faintly it nearly vanished into darkness. And everything that followed, every forest, every creature, every human breath, depends on the fragile fact that it did not. To look back at that ancient silence is not only to study extinction, but to confront perspective, that life is resilient, yet not invincible, that recovery is possible, yet never immediate, and that balance, once broken, carries a cost measured not in years, but in ages. The inheritance of the great dying is not fear, but awareness. And what we choose to do with that awareness will shape the chapters still unwritten.